Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of The Journey Within. I am your host, Andrea Escobar Logreda, spiritual guide intuitive. Today, we are joined by Moshe Gersht, a U.S. Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller author, sought after speaker, and spiritual teacher. Previous to all of that, he had a quite different path, spending nearly a decade touring the US as a singer and songwriter for popular LA bands, such and opening up for the Black White. Why am I butchering everything today, guys? It's one of those days. I will edit this later. So I'm going to start again. But previous to that, he had quite a different life, spending nearly a decade touring the United States as a singer and songwriter for popular LA-based rock bands and opening up for different bands such as Yellowcard, All Time Low, among others. After leaving the music world behind, he immersed himself in a spiritual discovery, reawakening, where he then moved to Jerusalem, where he spent the last 15 years studying and really diving deeper into his personal journey. I can't wait to dive deeper into his journey and for Moshe to share his speaking, teaching, and writing with us. Welcome to the Journey Within. We're so grateful for you and honored to have you here with us.
Andrea, the pleasure is mine. So nice to sit with you today.
So great to sit with you. So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about your book, It's All the Same to Me. And I mentioned to you that I felt like everyone in school should get a copy of your book. It's really digestible and it changes the way that we kind of interact with life. But you mentioned that your mom, you kind of grew up with the book in a way through your mom. So I would love for you to share more of your childhood and that experience with us.
Sure. So I grew up in Southern California, in LA. And as I was telling you before, my path was, in a certain sense, maybe different than others, but maybe similar in many other ways. I didn't grow up with nothing. I kind of felt like, in a lot of ways, I grew up with everything. Both my parents are very spiritual, and my mother, she, in her youth, went through a lot of her own personal traumas that sent her into a journey of, spiritual search and path, and she fell in love, very similar to how I feel about just the entire experience of spiritual experience, the principles, the philosophy, the science, the connection. And she was already knee deep in that entire experience before I was even on the scene. And so I was raised in a home that was very God conscious, that was very spirit conscious, that, instead of speaking about, I don't know, Winnie the Pooh is more like speaking about reincarnation. And instead of, Cat in the Hat, which I'm sure it was in the house. Yeah, I think we went to sleep with Chicken Soup for the Soul, not the one that was for kids. And in the car, we'd be listening to tapes of Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle. So like on the way to school, right? Like that was very normal for me growing up. And we're also in somewhere along the way in my youth, my family took a step in the direction of my family's Jewish, and we were not observant in any way, like very, very far away from orthodoxy. But there was an awakening. My father had an awakening at some point maybe a reawakening, however you want to call it. And he moved in that direction. And by the time I was around 10 years old, my family made a major transition to orthodoxy in the world of Judaism. So a lot of these concepts were now coming together, but it wasn't literary. It wasn't like I was picking up books and reading these things. And it was like, that was just the way that my parents raised me, was with an attitude of spiritual awareness and gratitude and joy and looking for the good. And I say this story a lot, like whenever we'd get to a red light, if it was green and it was turning red, or if it was red and turning green, my mother would say out loud, under her breath, but you could hear her say thank you, right? It was very alive, the world relationship, whether or not you relate to it as God or the universe or spirit or whatever language you want to use to speak about the infinite, and the energy within reality. So that's on one side, that's how I was raised. And then, I don't know how deeply we want to go into it, but that was my
so
kind of
deep. I'm like so
okay,
intrigued. Like,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, so that was probably until like before I came of age and started finding myself.
Yeah.
And I found myself a large part through music.
Okay.
I'd been playing piano from, I think I can ask my parents, either 5 or 7. I was a kid. I started playing piano. I played for, I think it was 5, and I played for 7 years. And then I heard a rock song for the very first time, and it was a band called Weezer. And I was sitting with my best friend at the time, Adam Ratner, and we were sitting in his room, and we're these 12-year-old kids. And it got to this one point in the song where there was a guitar solo. It was a very small moment, and everything inside of me said, "That's where you're going now. Like, that's the direction." And I totally shifted. I made my parents get me an electric guitar, and waited till my birthday, and finally got it. And then I spent the next 7 years writing and recording and singing for a rock band. That was even though I was in high school, most of my high school was kind of typified by this band. That I came into high school as already writing and recording, and everybody from high school would be coming to our concerts. And being in an Orthodox high school, there weren't too many other rock bands, so it was fun. It was an amazing experience. We did that that was my life. My whole life was music. I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be performing. And as an artist, you just want to share your creativity, right? So
I just have a question.
Sure.
How was that? Because LA music scene is still LA music scene. And you are going to school in an Orthodox kind of school. So I'm sure that the way that the school is bringing you up isn't necessarily the same way the music scene is. How did you navigate all of that? Were you censoring songs, or were your parents ultra supportive and just kind of we taught you, we've been instilling all these not even practices, they were so interwoven into your day-to-day life that it was almost look, we've given you everything, now it's time for you? Or was it not like that? I'm just so curious as to how that all just unfolded.
You're right on point, Andre. It's such an intuitively right question. It was not a walk in the park from the school's vantage point. Several times they had asked me to stop. And I understand them today, seeing it from within their perspective and their lens on life and the way they see things. So if I were them and I saw the world the way they saw things, I'd probably feel the same. Thank God I'm not. So it was what it was. I at one point I did stop. We officially, the band broke up, but it was really just a cover up so that we wouldn't get kicked out of school. But by the time I was a senior, about 4 months before graduation, we were playing shows that had between 300 and 500 people coming at a time to these concerts, and a lot of them were from my high school, as well as there were 3 other kind of Jewish Orthodox high schools in the area at the time. So it was kind of drawing from this pool of people and then kind of spreading beyond that. At that point, the school said this is not what they were looking for in their student body. Even though I was a straight A student, I was a really good kid. I didn't do anything too far out of the box other than this. But they said, we can't. It doesn't make sense for us to expel you because you didn't do anything wrong per se, but you can't finish. So they made a deal with me, and they said, you'll take 1 class from a community college, and behind closed doors we'll give you a high school diploma, but to the staff and to the parents and to everybody else, we have to let them know that you're not in the school anymore. So it was, and then my parents were vehemently opposed. They were like, this doesn't make any sense. He's a kid, let him do his creativity, whatever, all that stuff. And they went back and forth, and my parents were very supportive. Our community rabbi was very supportive. And the school, even there were people in the school who didn't want it to happen, but they felt there was too much pressure from the community or from whoever it was. And I had to make that choice. Basically, my parents said, like exactly how you said it, of like, we've given you these tools. We want you to be creative. We believe in what you're doing, and we love you and trust your judgment. And do you want to stay in school, or do you want to keep this band? And I said, this is my life. I'm keeping the band. And they said, okay, great. So that's it, I guess. I guess you're done with high school. And that was the end of my high school experience.
That, I feel like, first of all, like, to both your parents, I just want to say thank you, because I feel like it's really hard as parents. I'm not a parent, and I'm speaking out of like left field, but just kind of trying to put yourself in their own shoes. It takes a lot to be able to say, hey, you know what? I've done everything that I can. Now it's just up to them to make the choice that's right for them. Not the choice that I want or the choice that I think is right. It's the choice that's right for you. And then following with that, because I think it could be very easy to just kind of want to, no, well, I know better. I'm older. I've lived longer. Let me guide you. Let me show you the way. And, you know, when you're 18, you're like, Mom, Dad, you don't know everything. Shut up. So it's this kind of thing. But instead of going about it in that very typical way, which is how most of society views how parents should handle situations, they were like, no, you're 18, you're an adult, or, you know, 17 or whatever. You need to decide. And I think that's beautiful, because they allowed you to take ownership of your life at that moment. And then everything that went after that, it's like, that's on you. You decided to make that choice. You have decided. That's just such a magical experience that they gave you. So, wow.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was magical. And I agree with your sentiments that I also say thank you. And I try to tell them often. But for all the parents out there who may be thinking, wow, those parents are nuts, I should put it in the context of, it wasn't like I was born at 18 and then they said that. My parents and I have a deep trust between each other, a very, very open relationship, lots of communication, which if you're a parent listening, there's nothing more valuable than an open, clear, loving communication with your child, because that lasts, you know, and that allows for, and the right time when you do want to say, hey, you know, put the brakes over here on something, you trust them, and you don't feel the need to rebel, because they've been so supportive and loving on the other side. So number one, it was in the context of a very open, close relationship, and it's by and large not like that for a lot of people. So that's one. And two is I was 18. I wasn't a little kid at that point. You know, yes, I was a young man, a growing teenager, but they respected that. So again, if you have younger kids, it doesn't mean that you allow, you know, like I have a 2-year-old, son is 3, and he loves scissors.
Oh man.
So even though we'll let him there with, you know, the special kid scissors or whatever it is, and we stay by there. But just because a kid wants something doesn't mean you let them have it either, right? It's really, at the end of the day, you got to be present and aware with life. What is life presenting you? Who are you in this moment? Who are you with? And what's coming up for you? And when you're really there, then you can be more trusted when you're grounded in that space.
You know, it's interesting that you said that, because my initial thought was, I mean, you have, and I'm 30, and I'm going to say this, there's times when my inner child comes out, and I will look back 2 hours later, and I'm like, why did I react like that? Or why did I do that? Or why did I buy that? And it's literally 7-year-old me calling the shots. And I have to take a step back and realize, while they're all aspects of me, it doesn't mean that I can allow, I let her play, and I let her go out and be her, because there's a lot of things that I wouldn't be able to tap into if I didn't. But if I allowed 7-year-old me to call the shots, I wouldn't pay my rent. I'd be eating ice cream all day. Like, there's just certain things I was telling this to my friend the other day. I was having like a crappy day and I went to Whole Foods and my initial thing was to get cereal and milk. And I had like, I'm like, I'm going to spend $12 on cereal and milk right now to self-soothe my inner child. And 10 minutes later, I'm going to still feel the same exact way as I do now. So I put the cereal back, I put the milk back, I walked out of my Whole Foods, went into my car, and I sat there for 15 minutes. And it was asking what you just said. It's like, what's going on right now? What do I need right now? And what can I give myself to get to feel that? Because the cereal's not going to do it. Buying a shirt's not going to do it. Calling my friend isn't going to do it. These are all distractions that I'm looking at. And I think that's so important because you can be 18 and have that awareness. You can be 5 and have that awareness. And you can be 50 and have that awareness. But you also could be all of those ages and not have that awareness. So I do think a lot of it is, like you mentioned, it's that trust. My mom was very trusting of me when I was 16. Because of that, we had a very open relationship. But her way was, if you do this, there's a consequence. You decide what you're going to do. So she handled that from a very young start. It wasn't always the best because I look back and I'm like, I mean, I was 3. I don't think you really should have negotiated with a 3-year-old, but hey, whatever. You did what you thought was best. Like she full on when I was, I think like 2, I wanted a birthday party. I wanted a Little Mermaid birthday party. And she said, you're 2. No, we can wait till you're older. And I said, I was a big girl. I could have a birthday party. So she told me if I didn't wear a diaper anymore, then I would know, then I could have a birthday party because I was a big girl. I trained myself to not wear a diaper because I wanted the birthday party. She's like, you learn from a very young age. Okay, I give you what you want, but you need to. But then fast forward, a lot of the times it didn't always end that way, where she would try to say something and try to get me to do something. I'm like, no, it doesn't. So we go back to, she's like, you were 3. And I didn't always realize the extent of how you could grasp some concepts, and others, they just went right by you because you were 3. And I go back to that anytime. I'm like, okay, as a 3-year-old, how can I see this? As a 30-year-old, how can I see this? And that change there will switch a lot, because that's, as a 30-year-old, my ego wants to get involved. As a 3-year-old, I can look at it like, okay, bye. I don't need to be right about this. I really don't care. And it allows for a lot more. So with high school, you're in high school, all of this is going on. You decide, I'm done with it. I'm going to continue my band. What happens?
Yeah.
Like, what continues after? So do you guys stay together? Do you decide to go solo? Like, or did you fall on your face 3 months after? And you're like, oh man.
What's funny, right then, I think it was the same month, my parents said, we're moving in 6 months. I said, what, where are we moving? Where are we moving to? And actually, it was a little bit before, but right then it was like when it became clear that it was going to be in June, I think June or July. And I think this happened in January or early February. Okay. And they had said, we're going to move to Israel. My father is Israeli, and he's moving back. And the whole family's going. I have 2 younger brothers. Okay. So at the time they were, I think, 12 and 13. So they said, we're all moving, but obviously you're 18, you have your band, you're making this big decision about choosing the band over high school. Like you want to stay behind in LA. Otherwise you obviously have a place in our home when we move. So very shortly after that, I was completely on my own. And living in LA in a rock band, kind of like that. All of a sudden, my reality was I'm an 18-year-old kid in a rock band in Hollywood, trying to become a famous rock star. But they're super, super supportive. And again, there was kind of like this ultimatum of, take a year and try to make this work. and all the colleges I had applied to, I deferred from so that I could play music. And they said, look, in a year from now, if you're still not signed to a record label and it's not working for you, or in your words, if you fall on your face, you can always go to university or come join us in Israel. So it sounded like a good plan to me, and we went for it. And about 6 months later, we did sign with a record label, which has a whole story behind it. Maybe for another time. I think it's probably beyond the scope of this talk. But we did end up signing with a indie in LA, and then we got national distribution. We were at the time, growing up, there used to be these things called CDs. I know nobody knows what they are anymore. Oh, yeah. But at one point in history, there were physical items, which parenthetically, I really believe with all my heart that the shift from the CD to the MP3 is just the musical point of spiritual evolution for us to see that the physical world isn't really where everything is. And we made that transition very early on in the world of music, because music is essentially spiritual to begin with. But anyway, so our albums were in like every Tower Records and Best Buy and Target and all that, and we were touring. Things were great. It was a dream. Andrea, you have no idea, on stage, singing your heart out in front of hundreds of people every night, sometimes thousands of people, and like seeing the happiness in their face, the energy that came through the guitar, it's a dream. It was an amazing experience. And then getting to spend time with some of the people we really looked up to. Everything was going great until we found out that one of the band members, they didn't show up to practice a couple times, and then they didn't show up to a concert. Like we showed up to the concert and like they were missing, and they never ended up showing. So we got very nervous, and we found out they had become addicted to methamphetamines, and that was a hard reality and a hard pill to swallow, to wake up and realize, okay, this is what they talk about. And everybody always, would tell me, you're in an LA rock band, like it's just a matter of time before you hit, the drugs and alcohol part of the circuit. And it hit us hard because we've been playing together for almost 7 years, and all of a sudden he didn't have control over his life at that point. So to make a very long story short, at one point along the way, the record label, my manager, the publicist, and the rest of my band came over to me and said, our album's going to come out in 2 months. We have to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to keep this guy in the band. And he was a dear, dear, dear friend of mine. And so they said, look, you're the singer, the songwriter. This is your band. He's your friend. So you have to make the decision. If you want to keep him in, you can keep him in. But we think it's to the detriment of everybody. So you have to make this decision, which I think became ultimately the fire behind the shift in my life. I ended up taking a break, and I came to Israel, which for me was really the first time that I ever came to Jerusalem. Was the first time I came to see all these different holy sites, and time away from where I'm from and time with my family. And I went into like a lot of like deep contemplation during that time. And already there, I could feel rumblings of a shift taking place inside of me while I was going through this, though it hadn't become clear to me yet. And during that time, I made the decision that yes, if there's any chance that this band is going to make it, this guy needs to indefinitely be in a hiatus so that he can get well. Right? He'd been in and out of rehab at this point. So we came back and we made this decision, and it was an emotional week anyway, because the day that I landed was the day that our album had like debuted on K-Rock, which was the Los Angeles rock station at the time. So it was really exciting. And then we shared this with him. It was really challenging conversation, to say the least. But that was it. After I got back, though, I had made this inner shift. Like I said, I kind of felt the rumblings in Israel. And for the sake of brevity, we'll save a lot of the details, but I started reading. I wasn't a reader at all. And again, this is kind of to the first point, which is because I was raised with kind of such clarity of life, I never felt the need to search. it was only once I kind of found myself in places that required me to go deeper that I started learning, and I started reading, and I started studying these other things. And I was reading these books on Torah and Kabbalah and Chassidus and kind of these really, really deep ideas. And I was getting very, very inspired about, what is this thing that it's attached to me, this heritage that I've been carrying with me this whole time. And the turning point of the whole thing for me was when at our record release party, my guitar player came over to me and said, how long are we going to do this for? Which was a weird question to ask anybody, especially a singer. And I said, do what? He said, play music. And I didn't understand the question. I said, I don't know, we'll probably play until we're successful and then we'll settle down. Like, I don't know, like, what do you do? That's what you're supposed to, like,
Yeah.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to play until you're successful and then you have like live a life. And he said, when's that? And at that point, I was pretty frustrated. But I asked him, when's what? And he said, when is successful? And I basically told him to shut up and get another beer because he was ruining my buzz. And I didn't understand why he was ruining my night with all these deep philosophical questions when everybody was, singing all the new songs on the album and we're doing this whole major party. But I woke up the next morning and the question didn't leave my mind. When is success? When is that? And I kept thinking about it for like a week. I kept going, what? I never thought about that before. Just kind of did what made sense in my heart. I never really thought beyond that. And that's when I started really looking into, what kind of path am I on? Have I ever thought about this? And I started looking at all the people that I had looked up to in the world of music, and most of them had personal lives that I didn't want to emulate. They had a lot of success. They were doing a lot of fun things, but I didn't see where it was going. I didn't see that was the direction I wanted to go in. And I was again faced with a new reality, which was, number one, I had just turned away my high school. I never got a diploma, by the way. Still waiting for it. If anybody out there is from my high school and you can give it to me, waiting. Never showed up. But I just threw away my high school. My family had moved to another country. I stayed behind and like spent the last 7 years working on this band. And all of a sudden I was like hit with this major, major clarity. Actually, so interesting. It was exactly 14 years ago next week. So I remember the exact day when that happened. And anyway, I was hit like it was like a lightning bolt in the darkness of like absolute clarity, just for that moment where everything lights up in the dark sky, and the lightning goes and you can see the entire landscape and everything is clear. And I had this like absolute clarity that if I was going to hear the depth of the calling of what I'm here to do in this world, to do and to be and to really connect to myself and live the life that I want to have, it's going to mean leaving this band. And which was the unthinkable at the time, because everybody was invested in this. Myself, my parents, my brothers, my friends, my family, they were my entire social network as this rock band. But once it's clear, it's hard to walk away from clarity. Once it's clear, it's clear. And then it just became a matter of how. And it was hard, it was hard to leave, but I made the decision. I told them not too much longer after that. And I was blessed to play our final shows together. They were a lot of fun. On stage, off stage, people didn't speak to me anymore. The band basically looked at me and said, we're cutting you out of our life. Like, that's it. You're done. I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to be the byproduct of making an idealistic decision like that. I'm happy the record label didn't sue me. I was in breach of contract. That was a blessing anyway. And then I left, and I didn't even know where I was going. I didn't even know what I was finding. Like, I knew I was going to go to Jerusalem because that's where my family was. They were in Israel, and I was going to go try to find myself here and search for truth in the path of Torah. But who knew? I didn't know. The first time I saw the place that I showed up at, the apartment I showed up in, was when I got there. I went from the airport. My father picked me up and gave me a ride over there. And I was like, okay, I guess this is where I'm sleeping for right now.
Yeah.
This is where I'm going. And then I fell in love. I fell in love with I spent at the next 14 years. I mean,
Yeah.
living in that space, the spiritual space.
There's right now, my Gemini mind is like, there's so many questions. Like, on one end, it's funny because, and it's not funny, haha, but everything that happened last year, 2020, depending on who you ask, you're going to have a different answer on what they're going to say about 2020. My audience and the way that I view it is, hey, universe, spirit, God, whatever entity you relate to, is like, you need to wake up. You guys are not awake. Time to wake up. Gonna take you out of your comfort zone. So kind of what you're saying right now, you literally were just like, all right, I got clarity. I'm going to follow this like inner voice that no one else can see, hear, speak to anything other than me. So I can't even like go to someone and be like, hey, do you think this is a good idea? Because they're going to literally tell me, you're crazy. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Right? But you went. And the reason I'm saying this is when this happened, it wasn't cool to be spiritual. Now it's in trend. Now it's, I meditate for 15 minutes, give me a gold star because I wear Lululemon and I do yoga. And I'm poking fun at what brought me into spirituality. So I'm not even trying to shame anyone with this. The reason I'm bringing this up is now you do something like this and you're like, I'm going to go find myself for 6 months. And people are like, oh yeah, that's amazing. 15 years ago, 18 years ago, people weren't like, oh yeah, you're going to go find yourself. Yep. That's what you're going to do. Great. It's like, you're what? Like we're getting away from. Now when I talk to people and when I ask them like, hey, what have you been into? I'm not asking for what externally can you show me that you've done. It's more of like, what have you discovered? And that's what you were doing. How did you I know your family was supportive, but how did you left everything, like your entire social, I'm just like, how? You have all the knowledge now, and I know why now, but how did you do it at that moment?
That's a great question. Andrea, you're great. Really, I love
like,
it.
I have so many questions for you.
It's funny. For years and years, people would ask me that question. Like, how did you do it? Like you left your dream, you left your investment of time and energy, you left your, everything, right? All that stuff. And for years, my answer was I didn't. I felt I was taken, like moved by something else, something bigger. But in the last little bit, as I kind of reflect and go deeper into it, that would be unfair, I think, to say in the human experience, which is it's not true, which is I did make those decisions. So how was I able to do that? And it wasn't like I knew the answers. Like you said, in retrospect, we can look back and say it was a good idea. Like it could have been the worst decision I had ever made.
Yeah.
I think the answer was it was the same voice that I'd listened to that told me to play music in the first place. The same trust that I had been following my whole life said, okay, the highway ends here. You now get off this off ramp, and there's another road to go on. And it was trust. And I think that when you are able to lean into the trust of knowing that things are working, even if they don't look like they're working, even if it looks like your whole life's like falling apart, which at the time that's actually what it was, right? Everything you had built is now falling apart, like it's all over. But when that little voice comes and that little knowing kind of nudges you, sometimes the intuition comes from within, and sometimes there are like some coincidences or synchronicity that like help move you along the way, and usually it's both. And in Kabbalah, there's an idea called Memale kol almin and Soviv kol almin, which means that God both fills all the space as well as surrounds all the space. So it's both from within and without. Like you have to know that the whole reality is all that one thing. So the knowing that it's okay to lean in and listen, that's all I did. Everything else was basically a miracle. Everything after that. But you trust it. Things are going to work out. Things will unfold in a way that makes sense to a higher good, even if it's not apparent to me. And probably had I showed up and it was not what I was looking for and it was something else, so I would have gone somewhere else. So I would have done something else. Meaning, it was being okay with the situation as it was presented, and yeah.
You just said something. I read something I don't even know where, but they were saying that the difference between a human and a rock, when it falls off a cliff, a rock just falls silently, knows that its fate is going to be the ground regardless. We humans are kicking and screaming on our way down when the fate's still the same. We're still going to hit the ground. So it's kind of just letting go and stop screaming and just wait till you arrive.
Yeah, but also, someone once pointed out, you can have two different people who have a feeling of angst in their
Mm-hmm.
chest,
Mm-hmm.
and one person interprets it as anxiety, and the other person says, "I'm excited." So yeah, we're all moving in the same direction, but your interpretation of what's happening inside of you while it's happening, that's what you get. That's your part in this world, in the drama as it unfolds. How are you interpreting and seeing what's taking place? And sometimes you're able to see it in a positive light or in a way that makes sense to you, and sometimes you can't. Meaning, we just went through a major tragedy here in Israel just a couple weeks ago, and the whole country was in mourning. It's like very, very hard to see things in a positive light, but everybody had a different reaction. Right? It was going to happen anyway. It happened anyway, and we're processing it and grieving it anyway. But everyone's going to go through that in their own way. So, like you said, the rock's going to go down. People are going to go down. We're moving in a certain direction. But your perspective while it's happening and the way that you process things is the gift that you're given in your life.
You just gave me almost a way to detach from humans. And that sounds so weird, but I'll give context because it goes back to, it's so intertwined with what we're talking about in your book. I went out with my brother was visiting last week, and him and my mom went out to eat, and they started to talk about something. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, guys, I hear you. This has nothing to do with them. This is a strange message for me. And you're just using them as the puppets to relay the message. And I got the message, and then something happened, and I could literally see it like, hey, look, we gave you the message so that you were equipped to handle this situation. And I'm laughing at this as it's all unfolding because I'm in a very aware place, and I'm like, oh yeah, this makes all the sense in the world. And just like that, I snapped out of it and I did exactly the opposite of what they were telling me to do. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you upset? And this voice came back like, why are you making this about you? Didn't we just tell you that nothing has to do with you and you're making it about you? But that's that. It's you and I can see the same rock fall. And I can be like, oh my God, look, the rock's falling. It's going to be amazing. And you're like, oh no, the rock's falling. What are we going to do? Like, and then the third person can be like, oh, look, they're excited. Like, it's just going to be totally different based on your experience and your coloring and life and all of that. But why can't we just witness everyone's experience? Why do I now have to interact with your experience? Why can't I just allow your experience to be yours, my experience to be mine, and know that they're all playing a part together? It doesn't separate us. It's just I don't have to make you me you, because I know that at the end of the day, we are one. I don't know if everyone else, if this makes sense to everyone else.
I love it. Jam, keep jamming.
I think I just need to do that. I just need to pick up your book, read something, sit by myself for a minute. That's actually been my new, and that's something I wanted to kind of ask you now. With meditation, such a big thing now, right? And I remember when I first dove into this realm like 6 years ago, I was so against it. I'm like, no, meditation's for other people. I'm broken. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't meditate. Like, it just doesn't happen. And then I had someone that flipped it, and they were like, you're expecting something to be a certain way. Why don't you just remove that expectation? And I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, you see meditation because someone has shown you that it's this way. But if you remove that expectation and you just experience it, and I had no idea what that meant. So I went into it with like, all right, I'm going to experience, but still I'm like, what am I supposed to experience? Hey, what are you experiencing? Oh, I'm not experiencing that. I'm doing it wrong. And it was that. And the person came back and they're like, you missed what I said. Learn to experience it yourself. And I'm like, no, I am. I'm trying to. They're like, why are you going to other people asking them for their experience? What is your experience? And at that moment, I'm like, what are you feeling right now? Frustrated. Okay, what else? And all of a sudden, like, that's your inner like dialogue always. You don't need to meditate. That's it. How can you change it to now just a state of, I can observe without getting sucked in? And that started to switch it, but it didn't turn into like overnight. I'm like, oh, I love sitting here and just observing my thoughts. I still have an inner battle, but I've learned that depending on what I need each day, I'll have different things. So this morning I didn't meditate before starting to work, but I did read your book. And for like 30 minutes, I just sat there contemplating everything and analyzing how I analyze life, and spend a lot of time in my mind. And how can I take a step back? How was your practice before you went to Israel and you went down this path? Like, were you meditating? Were you taking time to practice? Or were you like, no, it's so in it that there's little things that I practice. And then when I need more, I'm kind of like, oh, I need to go inward.
I practiced nothing.
Wait,
before,
really?
Before I came to Israel, it was not, I mean, I really wasn't doing anything spiritual, in that
Yeah.
sense. But it, yeah, again, I feel very, very blessed. It was the way that I didn't know another way to live. I was raised with a certain mindset, with a certain heart set, with a certain way of seeing the world, listening to the world. My mother's clairvoyant, so she would tell us things were going to happen before they did. Like that was a normal thing. My mother met my wife at a wedding one day and called me up and said, I met your wife tonight. Before I was dating, I only went out with her over a year later, and she
Wait,
was right. But like,
wait, what?
so, and that's just like one of my whole life is like that, like
I need
she's
to
very,
interview your mom.
you should interview my mother. I agree. She's the one. I'm telling her, like, you're the one who's supposed to be doing all this, but okay, she's doing her thing. So I grew up in a very like with an absolute obvious well, of course things work a certain way. You only have to hear somebody say like, you only have to witness something that looks miraculous so many times before you recognize, like, okay, that's part of the order. It's part of the world. So my only practice at the time was I was very, very present, very attentive. I listened. If I had an intuition, if I had a thought or a feeling that came to me at a certain point, and it wasn't like an emotional reaction, it was like clear, it was like a non-emotional, non-attached, just like clarity. I was very attentive to it, but no practice. It wasn't like I was doing anything. Like I was having fun. I was 18, 19, 20. I was playing music with my
Wow.
best friends on stage, hanging out and partying and working at a sushi restaurant by day, bars, playing at bars at night. And like that, it was a fun existence. It was only when I had gotten the question of like, well, what is success? And then I started thinking about life outside of just music.
Mm.
So then when I came to Israel, so that's when everything changed. I mean, I don't even think I was really praying at the time. But again, I wasn't praying, but I would talk to God, or whatever you want to call it, all day, right? That was just like life.
That's where I was like, was it just because you grew up in a household that it was just so interwoven into everything that it wasn't like, oh, I need to take 15 minutes to sit in silence? I actually experienced that. And going back to your book, you talk about washing dishes. Washing dishes can be a meditative experience, but it's kind of, we're so caught up in what's right and what I should and should not do. And this is what it's going to make me more spiritually evolve. And it's funny that you have, I think it was like 4 questions or 5 questions that you're not supposed to like bother yourself. And the one was like, what blocks do you have in your spirit? That was the one that I was not applying. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I do know more than you, God. I'm always trying to like be a step ahead of you so I can help. It was like this huge, like, oh, that's why I'm like, I was curious as to if it was more just you were living it, and then you started to kind of dive deeper into the teachings of it. So now I can take it into a more of a practice, but you were already living it to an extent.
Yes. Okay, good. So in that regard, yes, you're right. I was living these truths without um we could compare it, if you wanted to compare it to like a
Yeah.
sports player or an artist. There's people that have like maybe a natural talent, but then you have to sit and learn and hone that in and develop it and expand the craft. So based on maybe both my nature and my nurture, maybe I had a certain natural affinity to spirituality and to God and to seeing the world in that way. But it didn't fit anywhere other than just my day-to-day experience. I don't know where it was leading me or taking me, but it took me right where I needed to get to, which, by the way, it always does. You should know that. Whenever you listen to that place inside of you and it's clear and it's not coming from sort of judgment or like a fear-based reaction to something, when you listen, it takes you to exactly where you need to go. And even if you say, well, when you get to this isn't where I need to go, but it's not true, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. So if you're there, that's where you need to be. For
I,
that moment.
no, I full on believe. I continue to read because of my own trauma in my own childhood. I'm very distrusting, and that's something I've had to accept instead of try to deny. My nature is to be very distrusting because of the conditioning that I picked up. Um, but I also realized that like my soul just wants to trust, and my conditioning's like, no, you can't, because this is gonna and I start to like almost, I'm like, well, this person already did this, I'm expecting them to do that, like I'm already getting ahead of it. And I've had to learn to not do that and just say, that was my experience in the past with them. I have grown, which means they have grown. So this has to end up in a different way. But it's a hard, I don't want to say hard. It's a challenging lesson for me to like go against what my, because I can have more things. I can count more. I'm like, no, this has happened. So it's more of that voice is louder. And I always tell people, I'm like, your soul, it's the faintest whisper. We want it to be this loud
Right.
thing. Your ego is super loud. It's good at being loud. It's been trained to be loud. But your
Right.
soul's like, while your ego is speaking to you at this tone. And it takes a lot more to trust in the soul than to trust what the ego is saying. And I love that yours wasn't what everyone else is like. I dove in, and that's why I was hearing the messages. It was more like, no, I was just present to hear the messages. And then going back to, you could have decided when you were in high school, actually, no, I'm not going to follow my band. I'm going to finish school, because on paper, that might be the safest option. And
It's
I'm
the
sure,
right thing to do.
right? So it's like, that's what and that would have opened a completely new route than if you would have taken the one that you took. So it's so beautiful that you say that you are exactly where you need to be, because everything is leading you to that next step. And we try to kind of want to see the full puzzle, but we can't. We need to just settle for the puzzle piece we have currently and then waiting for the next one. So you're there, you're in your spiritual kind of reawakening and all of this. We all know of your magical book now that we have. What happened there? What happened to, okay, I'm here. What am I going to do now? And then to the book. Like, how can we unite that?
So, I mean, probably requires another podcast, but the short of it is, after I fell in love with the teachings from an intellectual perspective, because again, until I was 20, I don't think I'd ever finished a book. I never read a book cover to cover. I was not a reader at all. My mother, not so much my father, but my mother is an avid reader with a huge library, and I was anti-reading. Give me a good movie and a PlayStation, and we're good. That was my high school. But then when I fell into it, the depth, the creativity, the unity, the order, the succinctness, it just like how everything just comes together, and often in such a simple, clear way. I was enthralled. I was enamored by Torah, like absolutely jaw-dropped, floored every day, every single day. There was not a day went by where I was like, how, like the whole world, like, why, where is everybody? Like, how does nobody know about this? I was just so moved, and it took a couple years. I was gonna do it until it made sense, and then originally I thought I was gonna go right back into music, which in brackets, I've been writing and recording and doing things for other artists in kind of like in the background of my life for like the last 10 years, but never in the forefront. But there was a certain point where I was asked to speak, and I got up and I spoke at an event, and the words kind of just flowed through me so clear and so natural, and that's when I knew that I wanted to be a teacher of this, because it was the same feeling and experience that I had when I was on stage with the rock band. But now, instead of singing about teen angst, I was sharing life-changing wisdom that could, transform your being. So I knew it was like a clear knowing. And then it was just, fast forward 10 years, it was a matter of time, just went deeper and deeper. I lectured a lot. I taught a lot. I still do. Went through a whole second awakening about 6 or 7 years in, with a whole nother series of disillusionment with certain aspects that had to do with culture, and social well-being and religion and different aspects of life, where I had to again reaffirm this inner voice, this kind of spark and part of me, and I was waiting. There was a point, and my wife's not here, but if she was, we could ask her, and she would tell you, like, there were a couple of years where I was just going without absolute clarity. I knew a general direction. I knew I was moving this way and not that way, but I didn't know where I was going to land. But I knew this was the right direction, and I kept moving. And I had learned from one of my mentors when I was much younger, who told me something that was extremely valuable, which was, you don't need to know exactly where you're going if you know the direction you're going in, but along the way, do everything in your power to only do things that support the general vision. Meaning, don't get distracted. If you allow yourself to get distracted by too many other side projects or whatever it is, you lose even the totality. So I was always doing things moving in that direction. Then in 2019, I wrote a book. I mean, I'd written my first book in, I think, 2015, but in 2019, I wrote a book that I am very excited about. I was really excited about, and at the right time, I hope to get you a copy. But before I had a chance to go to publish on that first book, Corona came and took over reality. And I was locked in my house with my family for 6 weeks. And during that time, I had locked myself in a room, and I wrote this book, the one that you're holding. So I wrote that book about a year ago, which was what I felt that was my personal inner space of work during this time, as well as what I felt a lot of people would be able to benefit from while we're all stuck and people are dealing with all sorts of thoughts and all sorts of feelings and feeling disconnected and isolated and lonely and anxiety and depression and trying to work out purpose and meaning. So many people, we all felt it at different times. There's so many people feeling this lack of purpose during this time because you couldn't do what you're used to doing or go out with the people you're normally going out with, and the feeling of being stuck. So then you're forced to kind of go in and become really present with, who am I? What is my life? What am I doing? And that's why, I mean, the subtitle is a Torah guide to inner peace and love of life, which is really what I wanted to give people, just more peace within themselves and love of themselves. So that's been, obviously a major part of my life journey. But a lot of my life's lessons had kind of gone into this because I felt it was a time to employ these ideas in a more profound way because we were stuck. Right? We've all been stuck for about a year.
It's insane though, because I do feel like we're all just looking for that. I know that it's gonna come off in a different way, shape, or form, but we're all looking for that inner peace and love, and we look for, and I'm gonna even throw in security. It's that inner security, and you go through life trying to get it from external things. And I know for me, that was something that I had to question a lot in the last year was, what does security mean for me? And it all started with when I realized I don't like change because I can't prepare for change. And I'm like, am I really prepared for everything in life? And the analogy that came to me, which was beautiful, but at the same time a little nerve-wracking, was every single time I get into a car, I have zero control of everything. There are thousands, hundreds of cars around me. I have no idea where they're going, if they're going to swerve, turn, or not. How many people don't put their directionals when they're going to turn? And it was this almost, I can't do anything. I can only be in my car, and that's it. And just show up and trust that it's all that everyone's gonna do their part and we're gonna get to where we need to get to. But that also made me realize security is, at least the way that I view it, is almost like an image that we're never going to actually get, because the world is always evolving and changing. If not, then the planet would stay still, and the planet doesn't stay still. So it's just, when you really hit it on that level, it's what is security, and it's for everything to stay still, because then I can predict what's going to happen. And I realized that's not life. So it was breaking down what security meant. And I feel like that's a very underlying lesson with your book. It's literally questioning everything that you know as true, and just kind of all right, is this actually a fact, or is this just a perception of one possible fact? If yeah, I know that makes sense to my head. No, it's magical. I honestly can't wait to see what other work you come up with, because I definitely feel like this is a book that everyone needs to read. We're all in a place in life where we could really benefit from a little self-inquiry and just self-questioning about everything. So,
Well, first of all, I really appreciate all those kind words. Thank you so very much. And to your point on security, a lot of people ask me why the title of the book can sometimes seem boring. It's all the same to me. It's all the same to me. Really? My brother likes to joke. He's going to write a book called "It's All the Same to Him."
That'd be funny.
Yeah. So, but that's this idea that you said, that to you security would be if everything stayed the same, if things were just still.
Mm-hmm.
So of course things don't stay the same. We're in a world that's constantly changing and moving, but underneath there's a stillness, and it is all the same. And that's why the inner peace that comes through these ideas and this message is that we're trying to step into, when you become fully present with what is, which is not an idea and it's not a concept, but it's an experience of being right where you are, and knowing that it's you can't really do justice by trying to put it into words, but in the knowing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be without standing in resistance to it, the experience you feel is peace, is love, is joy, because that knowing is beyond anything that you could try to come up with in your mind.
Yeah.
And over there, it's the same. In that place, there's some place where there's a place in your mind where there are questions.
Yeah.
There's a deeper place in your mind where there are answers. And then there's a higher place in your mind where there's not even questions anymore. Not because there's answers. It's just there was never a question to begin with. And that's what happens when you step into that space. There's not even a question, not because there are any answers from a logical perspective, but there's something that's beyond logic. And that from that emerges all the peace you could ever want.
So many nuggets of gold in this one conversation. Ooh, I'm going to have to re-listen to that. There's a lot to take from what you just said. Thank you for that. So we have a little tradition here on the Journey Within. I love to cosmically profile people. Do you know your astrology sign by any chance?
I think I'm Sagittarius. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I was curious. I'm like, you have to be a fiery sign. There's something in you that's just like super exploratory. No, it definitely makes sense being a Sagittarius and very much exploring beliefs, which is kind of where I see a little bit of you. So with everything that you have going on right now, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? What are you working on that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on all the regular social media platforms. So that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. The YouTube channel is really where my main focus is right now, trying to get a lot of deep ideas in short sound bites for people on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Moshe Gersht. And of course, check out the book on Amazon, and more to come.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your time and wisdom with us. We're so grateful for you and everything you have to share with the world. I can't wait to hear what else comes up in the works for you.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is really mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, guys, I will see you again next week with a new episode of The Journey With It. I hope you have a magical, magical rest of your week. Chat next time. Bye.